And welcome to tonight's edition of the One Hood Power Hour. I am your host, Kahari Mosley, here flying solo this evening because my illustrious colleague, Miracle Jones, is traveling back from New York City tonight and will not be joining us. But nevertheless, we have a wonderful, wonderful show tonight. We're very, very excited about our three very inspirational guests who will be joining us this evening. Sabrina Liu from Apollo Pittsburgh, Sheryl Stevens from Pittsburghers for Public Transit, and Maria Goellner from FAM. But before we get into our incredible guests and hear all about the incredible work they do and the impactful organizations that they work with, we're going to talk a little bit about everything that's happening in the political world. Last week we had the most recent January 6th hearing and continue to get information and testimony about what former President Trump was doing during the insurrection, during the riot at the U.S. Capitol. And as more information comes out, definitely, it appears to be more and more damning. Many people already had their suspicions, and many people had very strong feelings, and a lot of people felt like they knew what happened that day. But due to the investigatory work of the January 6th Commission, we're finding more and more very detailed information about what happened that day and the state of mind of the president. And many people out there really feel that as they felt for a long time, that all signs point back to the president having some foreknowledge, having a much deeper understanding of what was going on, and really did nothing to prevent the atrocities from happening that day, and really was hoping that the rioters achieved a level of success that they could prevent the counting of the electoral college votes and the peaceful transfer of power. So it's very, very interesting to see how all this is going to continue to unfold. Representative Liz Cheney from Wyoming has been at the forefront, and even said that they may bring in Ginny Thomas, Supreme Court Justice Clarence Thomas's wife, because there's a number of text messages and communication between her and various folks in the White House, as well as her and various officials from states around the country, trying to convince them to not certify the election in their state, and states that, by all accounts, current President Joe Biden won fair and square. So this is going to be extremely interesting to see how this unfolds. The original schedule and calendar for the hearings, suggested that, at this point, the hearings would be over. And they were going to have maybe 5 or 6 hearings. Now they're at 7 hearings, and we understand that there's going to be additional hearings after the summer recess. So we're going to continue to stay tuned to that story, and as much as we can continue to learn about what happened on January 6th. And in the local news, it was a big story today. Some of the beams and some of the structural material that is a part of the rebuilding of the Fern Hollow Bridge that we all know collapsed in January of this year. And actually, strangely enough, on a day President Biden was coming to Pittsburgh to talk about infrastructure. So it was a major event today where these very large pieces of material came in, which will be part of the support system for the new Fern Hollow Bridge, that goes over Frick Park, connects one part of Forbes Avenue going toward Wilkinsburg, in the Squirrel Hill Point Breeze section to Point Breeze and Squirrel Hill proper at Dallas Avenue. So a lot of people are very excited, and it looks like it's going to be a much earlier timeline. I saw something that the bridge may be completed by the end of this year, and I know originally they suggested that it was going to take multiple years for the bridge to be completed, but it looks like through state money and other things that they're doing in very quick time, they may get the Fern Hollow Bridge done in a much shorter time period than what was originally thought. And people like myself who live less than a mile from the Fern Hollow Bridge will be very excited to see the incredible traffic jams on Penn Avenue become a thing of the past once the Fern Hollow Bridge is completed. And there's just so much to talk about before we get into all of our guests, but just a couple things, I did want to mention. One of the big stories is Doug Mastriano, the Republican nominee for governor here in Pennsylvania, current state senator, has called for arming school employees to protect kids in schools in the event of school shootings like we've seen around the country. Excuse me, it's been extremely controversial, for the very controversial candidate. So I think this is just a sneak preview of, how just explosive, for lack of a better term, no pun intended, this fall election season is going to be with the candidate like Mastriano, who has such extreme positions and, has even been linked to, his campaign, and those close to him have been linked to very, very, very radical groups and organizations here in Pennsylvania, and around the state. Another interesting story we saw is Pittsburgh and Philadelphia police departments are in danger of losing their accreditation. Philadelphia Police Department is slated to have its state accreditation revoked in less than a week, largely because it failed to push back on the city's driving equality bill, according to a manager with the accrediting agency. The Pittsburgh police, due to a similar ordinance, are also at risk of losing their accreditation. Also in other news, Governor Wolf steers $40 million to Pitt and PA's other state-related universities. Governor Wolf plans to quietly give Pennsylvania's 4 state-related universities, including Penn State and Pitt, a one-time $40 million boost using stimulus money that he has the sole power to direct. The move follows opponents of abortion access in the State House unsuccessfully attempting to block funding over the school's use of research that utilizes fetal tissue. So, very, 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 interesting stuff. Another other thing I wanted to mention before we go to our first guest, 2 very interesting op-eds came out, which have got a ton of coverage in the political news cycle over the last 24 hours. And two publications that in the past have been, very close to President Trump, very close to Fox News and Rupert Murdoch and that entire conglomerate. One is the Wall Street Journal, who wrote an opinion piece saying the president who stood still on January 6th, and then the New York Post, which wrote a piece called Trump's Silence on January 6th is damning. And that really, those 2 headlines picked up a lot of attention just due to the fact that in the past, these are 2, publications that have been friendlier to former President Trump, as well as his cause. And also, again, being very close to Rupert Murdoch, being very close to Fox News, which clearly hasn't taken the same stances that the Wall Street Journal editorial board or the New York Post editorial board have taken. And these are clearly, 2 publications that will never, be confused for liberal outfits. These are very, very, very conservative publications. So we're going to continue, to keep, our eyes on that, as we get closer and closer, um, to this fall election. One other thing, um, I did want to mention, there was also an opinion piece by the Tribune Review, talking about the the veto override by county council, with Rich Fitzgerald's, he vetoed, legislation that was preventing fracking happening in parks, and it was a county council's ban on new fracking leases, in county parks. Um, it was passed by county council. Rich Fitzgerald vetoed it. County council overrode the veto, which is, a very, very historic thing, because it hasn't been too often that Rich Fitzgerald has had a veto overturned. It's not something that's a usual occurrence, particularly for, a county executive that really, 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 used the power of that office, in a very muscular way over the course of his tenure as county executive. So I think, as we've seen over the last year or two, at one point, Rich Fitzgerald, who was, very considered the most powerful, elected official in Western Pennsylvania, and very much wielded that power. Wielded that power with his allies, wielded that power politically against his opponents and those that he didn't agree with. But as we can see over the last several political cycles and legislative sessions, we have seen that power continue to wane as he gets closer and closer to lame duck status, as the county executive who could not run for a fourth term, who was in his final term due to term limits as county executive. So we'll be continuing to watch how things develop on county council, and as we look to a county executive election next year, county council races, definitely 18 months from now, county government is going to look tremendously different than it looks right now. We don't know how it's going to look, but it is going to look tremendously, tremendously, tremendously different. So that's our political update for tonight. Our top headlines, our hot takes, and so now we want to talk to three. We're going to start with one of three organizations, but tonight we're going to talk to three different organizations. And tonight's theme is activism and action. Three organizations that are doing incredible work, focusing on particular issues of local importance. And tonight we're going to start with our first guest, Sabrina Liu from Apollo Pittsburgh, who's going to tell us all about the great work that they do and how people can get involved with their work. So let's invite Sabrina to the One Hood Power. Sabrina, welcome to the show. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much, Kahari, the entire team at One Hood. Thank you so much for having me.
Awesome. Yeah, very, very, very excited to have you here. So just to start off, tell us about your organization, what it does, and what you do, and why is the work that you do so important and the work that you're focusing on.
Yeah, absolutely. So I am a volunteer at Apollo Pittsburgh. That's the Pittsburgh chapter of the Asian Pacific American Labor Alliance, which is a national organization with about 20 chapters in the country. And a few activists in this area founded Apollo Pittsburgh in 2019. We started it because there are a lot of Asian or Asian American groups in the area, but not really any that focuses on economic justice or that looks at how race and class show up and how race and class affect people's lives. So our focus is to mobilize Asian American and Pacific Islander community members to promote workers' rights and immigrants' rights. And some things we've done in the past 3 years included holding information sessions to talk about basic workers' rights. And when you have any workplace issues, how do you stand together, and the power of people standing together to demand something better. And we also supported workers experiencing wage theft. We distributed more than $77,000 in pandemic hardship assistance to over 100 families who were excluded from any federal program. We also supported campaigns to form a union in different workplaces throughout the city.
Awesome. And could you just tell us about like how I know the organization was not founded in Pittsburgh. Can you tell us a little bit about the importance of the intersectionality between you know um, the Asian and Pacific Islander community and organized labor, and how that coalition, that alliance happened.
Yeah, we so the nationally the Apollo got started in 1992, and the motivation behind starting the group under the Federation of a number of labor unions is really that people need to see themselves represented within the institution, within the labor movement. And in those days, you didn't really see Asian American, or Pacific Islanders in leadership. So that's one key issue that folks were really pushing for back in the 80s and in the 90s. And also, let's be just very real. Like, labor movement in the United States, the entire society in the United States, had a very ugly and racist past. So back in the days, I'm talking about 1930s, 1920s, people who looked like me was not able to join a labor union, even if they fought and risked their lives and their jobs for one. So the United States would come a very long way, and this fight really was built on the civil rights movement, so that the Asian American Pacific Islander community was able to build on that and lean on that to fight for the civil and human rights within the Asian American and Pacific Islander communities.
Thank you for that, and understand that that you have some information about a mobilization text banking event that had a number of organizational partners. Can you talk a little bit about that and give some context and background?
Yeah, so Apollo Pittsburgh, we started our first civic engagement activity in 2020 during the presidential election year. I mean, it was months, right, of the effort that a lot of different groups and people pitch in. So it started because many of us believe that our voice matter and that there were so much at stake. So we continued that work. Apollo Pittsburgh and our partners throughout Pennsylvania continue to really just link into the community members and listen. So this year, the Asian and Pacific Islander Power Caucus in Pennsylvania, which is made of a number of different organizations in PA, came up with a policy platform after a ton of surveys and many town hall meetings and listening sessions. And those conversations show that Asian American and Pacific Islander community members care about a number of issues. They care about having resources available in the language they understand. They care about getting meaningful allocation of resources in whether it's state level or local level towards community safety. They care about having immigration reform so that everyone is welcome here. And they care about getting fair funding for public schools or expanding healthcare access. And the outcome of the general election this year in November will affect these things. So we need people to participate and to vote so that our voices can be heard.
Thank you for that, and working specifically in the Asian and Pacific Islander community. What are some of the issues that are of most importance to that constituency?
So those are some issues I just named are a lot of what folks care about. But if we're thinking about issues, but also what we advocate for the most, I mean, some of them in this cycle, for example, immigrants' rights for everyone in the state to feel welcome. This is something that often is overlooked. But in our state, we have workers who work on dairy farms, in construction, in restaurant, and their work make our economy work. And a lot of our lives benefit from the work that immigrants in our state, in our country perform. So that's something that we've been pushing for. And aside from, I mean, stuff like healthcare, like a living wage, those are issues that isn't just specific to a certain group of people. A lot of us care about those things. But aside from immigrants' rights that I mentioned, but also the anti-East Asian sentiment and violence is also a thing that we've been seeing in this cycle of election. Because when candidates talk about global trades and talk about goods that come into this country, there is a way to talk about it that doesn't hurt a certain group of people. There's a way to talk about good jobs in our community, and we need good union jobs in our community. But when you talk about it without inciting violence against a group of people because of their look, or because the color of their skin. So these are some of the issues that we advocate for, but in general, a lot of it is just really about people's living and access to resources, and to make sure that our communities can thrive.
And thank you. And we all know, particularly at the very beginning, of the pandemic, and you alluded to it, that we saw, numerous heartbreaking incidents of Asian hate throughout the country, from coast to coast. I would say over the last year or so, there's been less, news coverage of that. Is it because these incidents have subsided, or is it because these stories are getting buried, by other news?
I mean, the violence and the sentiment that's anti-Asian or anti-East Asian, which is what we've seen more of in the past 2-3 years, they're not new, right? They've always been happening where we live. It was heightened because of the COVID pandemic and because of the rhetorics against East Asian, against Chinese people, but they always exist. It's a systemic problem, and they haven't gone away. And it's also, again, heightened because of election campaign rhetorics.
Thank you. And now, obviously, a great segue to talking about elections. Is there any particular work your organization is doing to mobilize voters, and if so, how are you mobilizing this constituency to get involved and vote in November?
Yeah, so this is really new to Apollo Pittsburgh, new to me. This is something I've been learning every day. So some of the stuff we've been taking on because of capacity is text banking. And then this year, something new we want to start is in-person door knocking, canvassing in some of the neighborhoods in Pittsburgh that has concentration of Latinx voters or Asian American voters. And when we do our entire project of civic engagement, the keys are really two things. One is we try to do as much in language voter outreach as we can. And we're also building a multiracial campaign with our partners in the Latinx community. So some of the key pieces that come out from like trying to make it multiracial and also in language and through the text banking that we're doing, and also in-person conversation, I think it's really like trying to get to two key things. One is technology and one's language. Because technology, I mean, nowadays it seems like everything you're trying to do, I mean, from voting to getting a vaccine, you're always told go online, right? But like that involves a number of things. Like you need a device, you need internet access, you need internet literacy, and which are luxuries and that not everybody has. So when we're texting a voter, our volunteers are spending time um, to hear voters' questions and finding information for them in a format of a text message. And language, in Pittsburgh, we have people who speak Spanish, Nepali, Mandarin, Swahili. But when we're talking about, things ranging from seeing a doctor or figuring out your vaccine appointment, applying for certain benefits, getting a driver's license, none of that is available in most of the time in any language other than English. So our plan is to reach out to voters. We're focusing on 4 languages: Spanish, Vietnamese, Korean, and Mandarin, so that voters will have a way, people who are interested in voting, but don't have the access, don't have the resources, don't have the information to do so, will be able to have what they need in order to exercise their rights.
Thank you. And I know we have a couple minutes left, but just from an educational standpoint, for someone like myself, who grew up in Pittsburgh, in the 80s, or graduated high school in the early mid 90s, when it was a much different city, demographically, culturally. Talk about some of the new communities that are now part of Pittsburgh, and what parts of the world they come from, just so folks can really understand the rich cultural diversity that's continuing to grow in our city, and where the different parts of the world those folks are coming from that are making our city better in so many ways, and bringing new culture, and new perspectives to our city.
Yeah, in terms of the Asian and Asian American communities in Pittsburgh, so our city, we have a large population of Nepali and Bhutanese immigrants. They've been in the city for, I would say, like a little over 10 years, and we have a very strong community organization, BCAP, the Bhutanese Community Association in Pittsburgh, that is made of immigrants from that community, and it's a very strong and powerful organization that's intricate in that community. And these people work in our public school, they run restaurants, they have grocery stores, they work in entertainment and hospitality businesses in the city. And also because of Pittsburgh, we have so many higher education institutions. So that also draw in a lot of immigrants to the city to learn and work in the higher education institutions, but also work in the different industries like restaurant industry that support the economy and businesses around those schools. So those are industries where the service industries, restaurant industry, hospitality are also where we see a lot of East Asian immigrants working in those industries, which makes this work of Apollo Pittsburgh really important, because in those industries we have immigrants who, because of their status or because of different reasons, are more vulnerable than others and more exploited than others. So like looking at people's background and also different reasons that may make themselves feel less empowered in the community where they live or in their workplaces is just really important.
Thank you for that. And before you leave, can you please let us know how folks can get in touch with Apollo Pittsburgh, for those who want to get engaged, for those who want to get involved or volunteer with Apollo, or even get plugged into the particular get out to vote efforts that you'll be doing with specific communities here in the Pittsburgh area? How do you get involved with Apollo?
Yeah, so this year we are going to do a number of text banks in the fall, and we also will be doing in-person door knocking. And anyone is welcome to join these efforts. You don't have to be Asian American, Pacific Islander, or Latinx to join this effort. Anyone can join. And so I assume folks are watching this mostly on Facebook, right? So you can find us on Facebook at Apollo Pittsburgh. That's APALA Pittsburgh. The best way to find all the information probably will be going to our Instagram page, also APALAPGH Apollo Pittsburgh on Instagram, because in the bio you'll find a link tree that can link to sign up for updates, contribute to us, or any upcoming activities we have.
Thank you so much. And Sabrina Liu from, oh yeah, and the text banking. Do you have a specific date for the text banking event right now?
Right. Thank you for reminding me, Kahari. So we have one tomorrow that you can see on the screen. So that's Tuesday, July 25th at 6 p.m. Eastern Time. We are reaching out to Asian American, Pacific Islander voters and also Latino voters in Pennsylvania. It's not too late to register, and you don't need any previous voter engagement or canvassing experience to join. Anyone can sign up.
Thank you. Well, thank you so much, Sabrina, for joining us. Sabrina Liu from Apollo Pittsburgh, doing some really, really incredible work, engaging some of Pittsburgh's newest and emerging communities, and doing a really, really important text banking event tomorrow, July 26th at 6 p.m. And we'll make sure to share that graphic again before we close out tonight. But thank you so much for joining us. Looking forward to talking to you again soon and working with you to make sure that everyone gets their voice heard this November.
Thank you, Kahari.
All right, take care. Thank you so much. And again, that was Sabrina Liu from Apollo Pittsburgh with some just really important information and really doing some incredible engaging work. Really, really, really interesting, conversation. Really excited to hear about the work that they're doing. So now we're going to move to an issue that's always been near and dear to my heart. I've always been a big transportation guy. I did a lot of work several lifetimes ago when I worked with then City Councilman Bill Peduto and did a really comprehensive public transportation project in his office early in the 2000s. Seems like almost 100 years ago. But we're going to talk to someone who's working right now doing that very important, incredible work. And that's Sheryl Stevens from Pittsburghers for Public Transit. Welcome to the Power Hour Show.
Having me.
Welcome. Thank you so much for joining us. And just to jump right into it, tell us all about Pittsburghers for Public Transit and some of the specific issues that you're working on right now.
Sure. So Pittsburghers for Public Transit is a grassroots organization of transit riders, transit workers, and residents who have been fighting to defend and expand public transit. We're working really hard to keep the public engaged in public transit and really mobilizing communities to advocate for equitable, affordable, and sustainable public transit systems across Allegheny County.
Thank you. And right now, is there any important issues that you're tackling right now? Legislation, policy projects. So what is right now front and center for Pittsburgh for public transit?
Well, there are so many different campaigns that we are involved in that actually touch at all of the levels of government, from city to state to federal. Currently, at the local levels, we have been working on a campaign actually to get affordable fares in Allegheny County. Because right now in the county, transit riders actually pay some of the highest fare cost in the nation at $2.75. It's very expensive to take public transit, particularly if you're low income, if you're on a budget. So PPT has been working to really figure out some strategies on how we can actually get fair equity for transit riders. So that is a campaign that has been ongoing, that we've been heavily involved in. And likewise, at the state level, we have been in a coalition of folks in different counties across Pennsylvania to work on equitable funding for public transit, because right now we don't actually have a long-term sustainable funding source for public transit, or at least at the end of 2020 we won't, because the legislation that funds transit at the state level, Act 89, is set to expire this year, and currently there is not a legislative replacement for that funding. So we've been working with partners in Philadelphia, in Johnstown, and Allentown, and Central Pennsylvania to really address the needs of transit riders, across the state, because that's one thing that as Pennsylvanians we all share is a need to be mobile, and to be able to move about our communities, whether it's city or rural areas, that there is a high need for public transit. So we've been working with partners at the state level to really sound the alarm bells for why public transit needs a dedicated state funding source. And we're excited at the federal level because we know that due to the infrastructure bill, there is a lot more money that is available for public transit. We just need to figure out a way to make it work for operations, because there's lots of funding for what we would call capital projects. So building things like new stations and getting new buses, but there's a little bit less funding available for hiring transit employees. So we've been working at the federal level to make sure that there's actual funding for operations to keep our transit system running smoothly. So that's a touch on some of the things that we've been working on at in every level of government, but we have even more projects coming soon at the local level as well. I'm particularly excited for our 100 Days Transit platform, which we launched at the end of December, at the beginning of Mayor Goellner's term, to really highlight some of the things that the city of Pittsburgh can do to support public transit, because many people believe that transit is sort of just in the purview of Pittsburgh Regional Transit, but there are lots of things that the city of Pittsburgh can actually do to support transit, everything from making sure that we have safe and adequate sidewalks for folks to travel on, to improve bus shelters and good lighting, and things like that are really critical to people's everyday experiences taking public transit.
And what are some of the best practices that you've seen around the nation that haven't been instituted here or utilized here that should be utilized, in the greater Pittsburgh area to enhance public transit?
That's a really good question. I would say at the beginning, finding a way to reduce the cost of fares is probably the one that stands out in my mind the most. There are several cities across the United States who, at the beginning of the pandemic, implemented a low-income fare program to help with the ridership disparities during the pandemic, because lots of people who were able to work remotely weren't taking transit as much. But there were still folks who were heavily dependent on it, including people who were critical in keeping life-sustaining services available, such as like cashiers, grocery store workers, medical staff who needed to get to hospitals to treat people. And we've been able to see that they have kept along their fare programs, particularly in Virginia. It seems to be working very well. Where they've kept fares free, and they've actually seen ridership bounce back, particularly at almost pre-pandemic levels. So that's been really impressive. And there's lots of other like infrastructure amenities that we've seen in several places where the infrastructure itself is particularly adapted for public transit in the colder climates. So things like heaters at bus stops are really important. So that's something that we've advocated for. But I would say on the fare side, I think that's where we've seen lots of gains in Virginia and places like LA, where they've made transit low cost for students. And it's had a huge community benefit.
Very interesting. Very interesting. Can you, talk, at least from my perspective, as someone who was a child, in the waning days of the streetcars, in the very early '80s, when they really, kind of ripped up the last of the streetcar line, other than the streetcars that still go to like Allentown. and the southern hilltops. And I think since then, when we really began to rely on buses, there's been a feeling, um, that it really caused, a disconnect. And it seems like, at least through political leadership, there's been a reluctance to make investments, like light rail, and things like that, which are obviously big ticket items and take years to develop. Are those kind of enhancements also part of your platform, or is it more around some of economic accessibility and other things that you've already mentioned?
I would say we're more focused on economic accessibility. However, it's interesting that you mention projects as well, because one of the things that Pittsburghers for Public Transit has done over the past few years is to really think about how we can look at what is essentially Pittsburgh's most valuable transit asset, the Martin Luther King Jr. East Busway, and figure out how to extend the busway into places like the eastern suburbs and Monroeville and outside of the city to connect folks to transit centers downtown and job centers to be able to make their travel a lot faster, a lot easier, because it can be, as I was mentioning, expensive with fares before PRT actually changed the fare structure. People were paying a higher cost. The further you lived, and the more transfers that you had, the higher cost it was to get around the city. So one thing that we were really excited about was a project that came out of the Riders Vision for Transit that was called the Beyond the East Busway project, where we talked with folks who live outside of the city and figure out what their transit needs are. And we saw there was a huge interest in extending the East Busway. And so that's something that we are heavily focused on. It's actually really exciting that PRT, or what was formerly Port Authority, received a federal grant to be able to study the East Busway and figure out what are connections that are feasible to bring people in. So that's a project that we are really excited to see happen. But I would say we're mostly focused on what are some of the, I guess, less heavy infrastructure investments, and really figuring out how we can get more people onto using transit, how we can get more employees driving buses, and just figuring out ways to make transit a lot more accessible and safe for folks to use.
And being that you work so much with transit riders and folks in the community, what is the feedback that you hear from them? Like what, because obviously, like, y'all the experts, and you have, a number of suggestions and best practices that the region, should take on, but what are the folks on the ground also asking for? What are you hearing from the folks that ride, the bus every day or ride the T every day? What do they have to say about the regional transit, and how can we make it better for the folks that use the system on a daily basis?
That's a good question. And I would say the folks who use the system on a daily basis are definitely the experts in this case, which is why we rely heavily on what they have to say about their experiences. One of the things that we've been hearing most often, and this started earlier in the year, once the Port Authority had put in place the vaccine mandate, we saw fewer transit operators available. We saw that people were left waiting a long time for buses that were scheduled to show up but never did. And then oftentimes they would be overcrowded. And even though that seems to have tapered down a little bit, we still hear some of those same concerns. Actually, I was just talking with a rider a couple of hours before this call, where she was coming from her tutoring, or she was trying to get to her tutoring appointment. And the bus was really late, to the point where she missed her tutoring session. And it's not uncommon for us to receive information where people are not able to get to work on time, missing school. There's a lot of concerns that we have actually coming in the fall about the frequency of transit, and we're a little bit worried about how children are going to be able to get to school on time, if there isn't adequate service. So we hear a lot from people about just the long wait times for buses, or buses that were scheduled to show up not showing up for people still. So that's something that we hear a lot from transit riders, and we're continuing to work on to figure out a plan to prevent that in the future from happening.
Thank you. And can you talk about any specific, initiatives and campaigns that folks watching, folks that are very passionate about transit, how can they plug in and get involved? What initiatives is PPT working on right now?
Sure. So there's definitely opportunities for folks to get involved. I would say our latest campaign, and I'm sure this isn't a surprise to too many people, but recently there was a situation in Swissvale with the Washington Avenue Bridge, where there were a few drivers who drove over the bridge, and they felt that the bridge was moving, and it felt very unsafe to them. And it almost immediately, PennDOT had the bridge shut down. And luckily, it is still up, and no one got hurt in that incident. But what ended up happening was that riders who use the bridge to walk across and get to the East Busway via the Roslyn station suddenly found themselves having to walk almost double time to try to find another connection to get to the East Busway, because that Washington Street Avenue Bridge was the biggest connection that they have. And some folks from Swissvale reached out to Pittsburghers for Public Transit. We worked with them to launch a petition to try to reinstate pedestrian access to that bridge. And I would say within 24 hours, we had over 100 signatures for that petition, and it doubled to 200 not long after that. And residents were actually able to get pedestrian access to that bridge, which was amazing. And now we're looking towards next steps for that particular campaign, and seeing what other transit improvements that can be made in Swissvale. So if you live in Swissvale, if you have friends that live in Swissvale, we have a petition that's up on our website that people can sign and figure out what are the next steps for that campaign, and what Swissvale residents really want to see as far as greater transit improvements to try to prevent things like that from happening again. We have also our other campaigns that are active, that are around Fair Fares, the 100 Days Transit Platform, Beyond the East Busway, and keeping public transit public, and reducing the, erosion of public transit by private corporations. So anyone is welcome to get involved. They can go to our website, sign up for our newsletters. We have monthly meetings that anyone is welcome to attend, that are on Zoom due to the pandemic. So they happen once a month, the second Wednesday of each month, so people can join us for those. We welcome people to become a member of PPT as we celebrate our 10th year anniversary. So folks are able to become members. It costs the same as a one-way bus fare, so that's $275. And we would love for people to just join us and turn out. So we have lots of different information on our blog. Also, long term, we're going to be working to really demand that the transit agency start to have a plan long term to increase the frequency of service and the span of service. So we hope that in their rebranding, that is an opportunity for us as transit riders to see better service, expanded service for folks who rely on public transit every single day to get to where they need to go. And people can also sign up for our newsletter on our website and connect with us on Facebook, Twitter, and our Instagram, and that's Pittsburgh for Pub Transit on our social media handles on Twitter and Instagram.
Well, thank you so much, Sheryl Stevens from Pittsburghers for Public Transit, giving us a lot of very important information about public transit, and it's such an important element of our regional economy that folks from all social classes participate in. Obviously, folks at disability community, folks from all corners of the county rely on transit, and our economy relies on transit. It's definitely the lifeblood of a region. Everyone can't get into a car and drive around. and actually would not be good for our environment or our economy if everyone was driving and there was not public transit. So thank you so much for the work you do. We're looking forward to having you back on soon. And particularly as we go into next year, and we have a very important election, for county executive, and whoever's the next county executive is going to have to make a lot of very, very important decisions about the future of the region directly related to public transit. So thank you so much for the work you do, and thank you for joining the Power Hour tonight.
Yes, thank you for having me. It was wonderful to talk with you.
Thank you so much. And that was Sheryl Stevens from Pittsburghers for Public Transit, giving us some very, very, very important information about public transportation and how it affects our region and the things that we can do to make it work better. Not only for our economy but for the folks who rely on it on a daily basis. So tonight we're going to close out with our final guest, and that's Maria Goellner from FAM. We're very excited to talk to her about the work that she does around criminal justice reform and working with folks who've been formerly incarcerated, as well as just making our criminal justice system much more fairer than it's been. So Maria, welcome to the Power Hour. Thank you so much for joining us.
Thank you so much for having me, Kahari. It's a pleasure to be here.
Yeah, and it's a pleasure to have you on. So you could tell us a little bit about FAM. What does FAM stand for, and what work does FAM do?
Absolutely. So FAM has been around for 30 years. It began as Families Against Mandatory Minimums back in 1991 and has since kind of morphed into just using the name FAM because we do so much more than just mandatory minimums now. So we are nonpartisan, meaning that we work with everybody. We are trying to get some things done. And as we all know well, sometimes people are in power that, may or may not be the folks that you would want there, or that you agree with, but we need to get things done. There are too many people in Pennsylvania incarcerated, dying in prison, serving extreme sentences. So basically, our advocacy is around a few central premises, that we lock up too many people for too long in this country, particularly in Pennsylvania, that this type of harsh or extreme sentences does not make anybody safer. If it did, we would be, one of the safest states in the country, in the entire world. And that's clearly not true. And our justice system really hurts families. So most of FAM's membership, I would say, comes from families that are dealing with a loved one's incarceration, and also many, many, many people inside returning home from prison, and thousands of families throughout Pennsylvania. So our members are in every county in PA. They are every color, creed, political party, but all agreeing that we lock too many people up for too long. So in PA, we're really working this second chance agenda. And basically, I know already that in the 80s, 70s, and 80s, we started putting more and more and more people away, primarily disproportionately people of color. And those folks are still there. They're now aging. They are literally geriatric. They are elderly. They are in wheelchairs. They have cancer. And about a quarter of our prison population in Pennsylvania is considered geriatric. And so a lot of what we're really trying to do policy-wise with this second agenda is around people serving lifers who have very little recourse once you get that sentence. And what we really want to do is three things: end life without parole, allow medical and elderly release, and also expand commutation, which right now in Pennsylvania is really the only second look mechanism. And where we want to go holistically with that is to say, your sentencing shouldn't be frozen in time on the date of your sentencing and that's it forever. That's not how people are. People aren't frozen in time, so we want the law to be able to go back and look again, revisit sentences, revisit people, see who they are, see if, see what's going on with them, see if people's positions have changed, see if society has changed, and give people a chance to get free.
Thank you for that. like as you said, going back to like particularly the 80s and 90s, the tough on crime era, and then and I would say, over the last 10 years up until very recently, maybe up until the pandemic, there definitely was a much stronger push for more progressive stances, when it comes, to the criminal justice system. But it seems like since the pandemic, I'm starting to just hear a lot of very similar language that starts to sound a lot like 1987, 1988. With some of the incidents of crimes, what I feel is directly related to the challenges presented, by the pandemic. Are you saying that same trend, where we're kind of like over the last 10 years, this momentum to really transform our criminal justice system kind of has hit a wall, and folks are starting to sound a lot like folks did back in 1989 and 1990?
Very much so. I mean, you really just hit the nail on the head. Absolutely. And particularly in Pennsylvania, we're really at a turning point, and it's a little bit scary because we're going into these elections in the fall, and we're starting to see, these political talking points that are really the same thing, right? They're the same thing that we were hearing 30 and 40 years ago. And it's like, we were just starting to talk about now, 30 and 40 years later, how to undo that. And we're beginning to hear this again as a political football. So we are fighting against that, vigorously. And again, I think one of the strengths of, for us, I'm not saying this is for everybody, but for us, of working with everyone and being nonpartisan, is that we can keep trying to make those bridge building relationships, and see where we can, build up folks who might not otherwise be thought of as a criminal justice reform champion. And we are still seeing significant interest in Pennsylvania, on the left and right, in serious criminal justice reform. I'm not talking about expunging a nonviolent drug misdemeanor. I'm talking about getting people out who committed homicides. Like, we're talking about very serious, stuff here. And I don't want to lose sight of that either. Like, there's, this is very heavy. These are very heavy lifts. But we're not giving up. We're staying, we're fighting. And we're just going to keep trying to, stop that backslide and move forward inch by inch by inch. And, as we know, we didn't start this movement. We didn't start this campaign. This has been going on for more than decades, centuries, right? And it's going to go on after our death. So we do what we can. We fight as hard as we can, and we keep going.
Can you talk a little bit about your Visit a Prison campaign, what that entails, and why that is so important?
Absolutely. So, this really piggybacks we were looking at, not just in Pennsylvania where I live, and, am invested in and from, but all over the country, and seeing that ugly climate, that you referenced, and thinking about what can we do that advances, the movement and the cause, in a year where it's going to be very hard to get really meaningful, good legislation, that you wouldn't have to compromise everything on, because of the political climate. And so we thought about, how can we relationship build? How can we get people proximate, to other people, to the issues? And the way that we decided to do that was our hashtag Visit a Prison campaign. And the tagline on that is, you can't know if you don't go. And basically what we have is so many lawmakers who are in charge of creating sentencing laws, they oversee the prisons, they oversee administratively the staff in the prisons, have never actually visited a prison. And even though I'm always telling lawmakers and talking to them and saying, 1 in 2 Americans, have had a family member who are incarcerated, that still leaves us with 50% who haven't had a family member who's incarcerated, right? And they don't know. And so we need to get those lawmakers and policymakers in positions of power in to talk to people who are incarcerated, who can make this case and tell their story far, far better than I ever could. And so we're doing that. And so on July 11th, we sent letters to 7,423 lawmakers, every state and federal lawmaker in the US, including all the state lawmakers in PA, challenging them to visit a prison in their jurisdiction. And it's fantastic. I've accompanied some of the lawmakers in Pennsylvania on visits so far. to SCI Fayette, about an hour south of Pittsburgh. And we have, I'm sorry, I was trying to think of the other one that we did. They're fantastic. I mean, we make sure that we ask DOC and the lawmaker to not just get the official tour, but sit down and spend time with people serving extreme sentences. We will hook them up with specific people that we know inside. We'll put the word out to our community and say, you know, hey, if your loved one's in this prison, let us know. We have some people going there. And we've seen amazing results. You know, I can talk all day to a lawmaker about commutation or medical parole. But like last week, when we sat down with Representative Austin Davis, who's running for lieutenant governor, which oversees commutation, and he hears from a man who says, I'm turning 71 this week. You know, I've been here for 50 years. 50 years I've been here. The Department of Corrections supports my commutation. I filed this 2 years ago. I've not heard anything back from the state, not word one. Like, that does more, right, than I could do in like 5 hours. So that's the purpose of the campaign. So many ways for people to get involved in that. Visitaprison.org. We have guides and suggestions and tips if you're incarcerated and want to participate in the campaign, if you're a family member, if you're a lawmaker. There are ways for all of you to get involved. So please look at visitaprison.org.
Are there any other particular policy areas or particular pieces of legislation that you're focused on right now?
Yeah, I mean, primarily it's around that second chance agenda. So ending life without parole, creating medical and geriatric parole, expanding commutation. And we have information on more on all of that on our website. We have a Pennsylvania page that has an overview. We're also trying to end the Department of Corrections practice of charging incarcerated people a $5 medical copay. I feel like I probably don't even need to tell people why that's wrong. Like, they're incarcerated. Yeah, I don't know. It doesn't make any sense that there even is a copay. It's insane. It prohibits access to care. If you can even get a job inside, it starts at 19 cents an hour. It's crazy. So we're working on that as well. And the Visit a Prison campaign, and we're looking at things to do for the 2023 legislative session. I can say I think felony murder is probably going to be up there on that list. If you don't know, anybody listening, felony murder in Pennsylvania, you can not kill anybody, not intend to kill anybody, and still get an automatic, no discretion, mandatory life without parole sentence. And we're one of the only states that still does that. So that needs to go away. And I think that's something that we're going to be working heavily on next session, in addition to the other things that I've outlined.
And thank you for that. And are you currently, doing any outreach? Obviously, we have, a gubernatorial election, and obviously you're nonpartisan. So I'm sure you're reaching out to the various candidates, not only running for, the state offices, but from the federal offices. Have you gotten any feedback from any of the candidates? Obviously, it's not an endorsement in any way, truly nonpartisan work. But, have you gotten any audience with any of folks running for state offices, for federal offices, and what has that feedback been?
Absolutely. So federal, not so much. I did practice law in the federal system, but I'm not working on that currently. I haven't sent those requests, although I know we are getting a great response to the campaign. In Pennsylvania, Representative Davis was particularly important because, as I think I said, he would chair the Board of Pardons, which oversees commutation. So that was amazing. I'm so glad he participated in the campaign. We've talked a lot about commutation and all of the things around it that FAM is advocating for, including just giving people a reason if they're denied. I mean, that's a very simple thing. There's so much that doesn't even take legislative change that we're also not forgetting about and advocating for, like giving people a reason if you're denied. Like, it's just, people should know. We do have a commitment from Austin Davis's counterpart, Carrie Lewis Del Rosso, to also visit the women's prison in northwestern Pennsylvania, SCI Cambridge Springs, to meet with women serving life sentences there. Again, super important because of the role that she would inherit if she wins that race. So we certainly ask all candidates always to please get in touch with us, talk to us about these policies and visiting a prison.
Yeah, and my last question before you give information how folks can get more involved. I know I was at a meeting in Harrisburg a couple years ago. I guess this had to be pre-pandemic. This is probably the fall of 2019 that FAM or organized, and I was struck by the bipartisan nature of that meeting, and there was representatives from a variety of nonpartisan organizations and advocacy organizations on both sides of the aisle. Is that momentum still there? In 2022, are you still seeing, because I know there definitely was, a number of folks on the Republican, side of the aisle. And we're not turning this into a partisan conversation, but there were definitely folks on the Republican side who were staunch advocates for reform. And many due to economic reasons and how just the devastation being the country that imprisons more people than anybody else in the world, what it means to our economy, what it does to our productivity, how it strains, the coffers, of our governmental budgets. Is that movement, still as strong as it was maybe in 2018, 2019? Are you still seeing that energy today?
We are still seeing the energy. I wasn't doing this work in 2018. I was on the side, but not in the same role that I am now. I do think that there is still energy. We just had Representative Josh Kale from Beaver, Washington County introduce pretty recently a fantastic, meaningful medical release bill that would impact lifers in a huge way. Currently, you have to be terminal, not able to walk, really horrible, very narrow standard to apply for medical release. He introduced a, smart, robust, fantastic bill that would expand that a lot. And so, and that's somebody, right, that from a rural county, Republican, I think doesn't fit the typical profile. Mike Jones from York County is another champion, in large part, not as much from the money, but because he visited women's prisons and seeing these women, elderly women in wheelchairs in prisons, impacted him in a deep way. He talks about how he's a businessman, but also a Christian. And, it really, really impacted him. So there is momentum. FAM is here to make sure that we don't lose that we continue having, continue that forward. And as far as folks learning more about the organization, you can go to fam.org, FAMM.org, or visit aprison.org. And I definitely invite you to reach out to me personally. I'm happy to talk to anybody anytime about these issues. We have a lot of family support resources. We have a once-a-month family call, private groups for families, tons of resources, because as much as, there's many more people out there active talking about this, there still is a lot of stigma for families. And so breaking that down is also a step towards seeing the change that we need.
Thank you so much, Maria Goellner from FAM, giving us very, very important information about criminal justice reform and, all the things that we need to do to make our system more fair, and to, bring justice across the board. I think people kind of look at justice in a very, very narrow lens at times, but, I really appreciate the work that you do to really show the very wide lens that justice, deals with. And, not only, do, victims of crime deserve justice, but, those who have made a slip up when they were 18, 19, 20, 21, 22, deserve justice too, as they redeem themselves, and work to bring themselves back into society and be a productive, member of society. As someone who grew up with a lot of folks who had been in the system, some of, just my biggest supporters through my college years and through the work that I do in the community are folks who, have been through the system and have that very unique perspective that those folks have, and are very, encouraging. And I think sometimes they are like the biggest supporters of positive activity in the community. And a lot of them, when they do get out, they do a ton of incredible work, working with kids, working in youth programs, sports programs, and doing all types of other stuff, being entrepreneurial, starting businesses, creating jobs, like the list goes on and on. We don't want to put folks in a box and leave them there, for life and throw away the key like we used to do in the 1980s. And I'm glad that folks like yourself and your organization are here doing that important work to, expand what the lens of justice is. So thank you again for joining us tonight on the Power Hour. Maria Goellner from FAM, thank you so much for the work you do and the work that your organization does. Thanks for joining us.
Thank you. Appreciate it.
And again, that was Maria Goellner from FAM. And you can log on at fam.org, FAMM. And what an incredible 3 conversations, tonight. Sabrina Liu from Apollo Pittsburgh, talking about the Asian Pacific Islander community and the labor movement. Sheryl Stevens, Pittsburghers for Public Transit, talking about the very important work they do, advocating for fair public transit. And just now we spoke to Maria Goellner from FAM, talking about the work they do around criminal justice reform. Very important criminal justice reform work that they do. One quick plug, I do want to say that our People, Power, and Politics pop-up, that's a lot of P's, People, Power, and Politics pop-up event is going on this Saturday at 12 noon. We will be back at Social Status in East Liberty. We'll have a DJ, food, very similar to what we did right before the May election. And we were going to be doing that every Saturday through the election. The only, not every Saturday, I'm sorry, the last Saturday of every month. Let me clear that up. The last Saturday of every month, except in October. It won't be the last Saturday. It will be the Saturday before that. It will be the Saturday before the last Saturday, because that Saturday will be the last Saturday before the voter registration deadline. But other than that, we are going to be expanding our People, Power, and Politics pop-up events. The first one will be this Saturday at 12 noon, and we will be at our usual location. Shout out to the folks at Be Social for always holding us down. We really support the work that they do. We really appreciate, the partnership that we have with the folks at Be Social, which is the 501c3 arm of Social Status, the sneaker and style boutique in East Liberty. So we'll be there. We're going to have a DJ. We're going to have food as usual. We're going to be doing voter registration. We're going to have voter information tables set up. And it's just going to be really our kickoff, of our summer into fall voter activation work, because we're getting closer and closer. November is going to be here right before you know it. And we want to get an early start on engaging people, getting people involved in the process, and making sure folks know the stakes in this particular election this November. This is probably going to be the most expensive election in the history of Pennsylvania. We have governor, lieutenant governor, U.S. Senate, Congress, state house, state Senate, all on the table. All 67 counties are in play. It's going to be quite an interesting, election with everything going on as we prepare, obviously, for very important elections in 2023. But before we get to that, we have these very, very important midterm elections coming up, and we're going to start that process as far as outreach is concerned, because the primary is over. We got a breather. We took some time off. The commercials went off TV, but, it's about to be that time again. It's about to be that time again, and we want to get started early and get folks engaged, making sure folks are registered to vote and registered to vote at the address you live in, so you don't got to drive across town to vote. You're going to vote right around the corner from where you live. So if you moved since the last election, or you haven't updated your registration, since you moved, this will be the opportunity. So come out. We're going to be in East Liberty from 12 to 4. Again, registering voters, playing music, eating food, answering questions. I'm sure some of the candidates are going to come out as usual. And we're going to be doing that the last Saturday of every month through the election, except in October, where we're going to move it up 1 week to the Saturday before the last Saturday, which will be the Saturday right before the voter registration deadline in late October. So we're really excited. We've definitely got some interesting special guests that are potentially coming starting in the August and September series that we're working on. So we really, really want to make it, really exciting. But this is going to be the first one that we're going to do. And as we get closer to the election, they're going to kind of get bigger and bigger and bigger guests and more fun and more excitement as we get closer. But this is going to be the first one. It's going to be the kickoff. And again, food, DJ, people, voter registration, voter information, candidates, elected officials, the whole nine, just like it was right before the primary in May. We're going to do it all the way through the election and do our best to keep folks engaged in the process. So make sure you get down there this Saturday. If you don't make it this Saturday, make it one of these Saturdays coming up before the 8th of November when we have the general election. So with that, I want to thank again Sabrina, Cheryl, and Maria for joining us tonight for just a very powerful conversation. I want to give a shout out to Miracle and the entire One Hood crew that was up in New York this weekend for a very incredible conference. And next Monday, when Miracle is back, we'll talk a little bit about that. Unfortunately, or fortunately, however you want to look at it, I was not able to make it. This weekend, celebrated my father. Many of you know Thaddeus Mosley, the sculptor. It was my father's 96th birthday. Once you obviously you get into the 90s, every year is like a huge celebration. So, it was wonderful, to spend some time with him, and talk and hear stories about the old days. And he's still in great health, luckily. And it's just a true treasure to have him in our family, as well as, in the Pittsburgh community. So I had to sit out the conference in New York this weekend to spend some time with family and celebrate my father's 96th birthday. But when Miracle's back in the studio next Monday, we'll hear all about this incredible conference that One Hood participated in. I'm sure some of y'all have seen some of the photos on social media already, but we'll save that for next Monday. And then we're going to end it like that tonight. Thank you so much for joining the One Hood Power Hour. This is Kahari Mosley on behalf of my wonderful guest, Miracle Jones, who my wonderful co-host, Miracle Jones, who wasn't able to join us tonight, but, she's always here in spirit, holding it down, and she will be here next Monday. And always shouts out to producer John for really being the one that makes it happen, really being the glue that holds this together. So thank you so much for joining tonight's edition of the One Hood Power Hour. I am Kahari Mosley. It was a wonderful talking to Sabrina, Cheryl, and Maria. I want to thank them so much again for joining us, and be sure to stop by Saturday between 12 and noon in East Liberty for People, Power, and Politics pop-up. Until then, I'll see you next Monday of the One Hood Power Hour. Everyone have a great week. Take care. Stay engaged. Stay involved. Stay enthused. Take care. Have a good night.